We live in a world where the dividing line between illusion and reality has all but disappeared. We don't need Batman or Spider-Man to inhabit our imagination and fantasy of telling us the story of good triumphing over evil. We have people like Kejriwal and, of course, the beleaguered Ukrainian Zelensky in the flesh and blood who fulfill our need for real-life heroes fighting the forces of oppression and tyranny against all odds. We hardly ever bother to examine this picture to see whether it is real or fake. We put up our hands in a show of support because the pull and the persuasion of the electronic media, which creates this narrative and imagery, is so persuasive and compelling. But for the collective sanity and good sense of the people, it is important we closely examine the pictorial glitter of these pictures, scrape the stardust of them, and see the real picture of these individuals. And once we have done that, I promise you, we won't be seeing a pretty picture. It is important for us to know who the real Zelensky is, or the real Kejriwal, or so many others of their ilk who they really are. But all of that in a minute. First, a big warm welcome to all viewers of the CAA show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis, and my name is Juggi Bhasin. The CAA show is a show for thinking folks who want to experience new viewpoints free of the ideological tyranny of the right and left rhetoric. So, if you want to be a part of our journey, join us by pressing the big red subscriber button on your screen. Subscription is, of course, completely free. Now, if we accept the principle that the world is interlinked by economic interests, then, in a similar manner, understand that vested media outlets in different countries operate in the same manner to create mythical figures out of very ordinary, untalented, and sometimes even devious people. Now, take for instance the strange case of Zelensky. Not a day passes when we switch on our TV screens and we don't see Zelensky in his trademark olive green battlefield t-shirt dominating the airwaves. He's always on a roll, moralizing to all and sundry, especially members of parliament of Western democracies, rolling out his Churchillian rhetoric of we shall fight in the trenches, etc., strutting the streets of Kyiv, exhorting his people to defy the Russians and fight them in every possible way. And then there is this strange mix of his messaging when at one hand he exhorts his people to take up arms and on the other he implores and almost begs for talks to take place and end the war. Now, in broadcast after broadcast, he is saying Ukraine will remain a non-NATO member and neutral in the future. My short point is this. If Ukraine is ready to be a non-NATO member and remain neutral, why did not this enlightenment come to Zelensky in the very beginning when the Russians were asking him to see reason before the outbreak of hostilities? Why did he then, and even now actually, indulge in an inflammatory rhetoric that only stiffens Russian resolve? Why does the man chide and criticize NATO in one breath for not putting boots on the ground and not creating a no-fly zone, and at the same time addresses each NATO country and the lawmakers dishing out his defiant end-of-the-world rhetoric and seeking their indulgence? The many contradictions of Zelensky are on full display, and yet no one in the media questions him. Is the job of the head of a state to protect and safeguard his people, or to lead them in a war with his rhetoric which they cannot win and in the process endanger thousands of lives? The man, instead of working hard to diffuse the situation and pull back his country from the brink by negotiation and compromise and save lives, ratchets up his fury rhetoric every day, almost creating a situation for a third world war. Is this leadership or the abdication of all responsibility and common sense? No media channel ever questions Zelensky on these points, and certainly not on another glaring fact that the Messiah of the free world is a man who has banned 11 opposition parties in his country, which is really the entire opposition in that country, on the specious argument that these parties have links to the Russian Federation. So, a man who has shut out democracy in his country, who instigates his countrymen towards harakiri, who is completely non-serious about a negotiated ceasefire, is the media's darling, lionized and feted by the Western world. And closer home, the media created a Zelensky out of a Kejriwal, a man who after the Punjab win was anointed by them as a giant killer who will take on Modi in the coming state assembly elections and even in 2024. No one bothers to examine Kejriwal's record and performance in the municipality, that is, Delhi really, but everyone rushed in to believe that Kejriwal is the next big thing who will give Modi the fight of his life. And what does Mr. Kejriwal do when the dust and heat of Punjab elections have settled now? He gives a speech in Delhi Assembly where he outlines his priority is YouTube, a debunking of a film called Kashmir Files, and his callous mindset about the genocide of Kashmiri Pandits. That is my limited point in this episode. Media created cutouts like Zelensky and Kejriwal and have got their priorities all in the wrong place. Despite their pro-poor rhetoric, these manufactured superheroes have no sense what people really want. In Ukraine, are people more interested in saving their skins and a return to peace rather than building Molotov cocktails on Zelensky's call? And back home, instead of applying balm on the wounds of the festering wounds of Kashmiri Pandits, Kejriwal mocks them and in the process antagonizes the majority 80% community in the country. These are the people who are presented by a Western media as the next big hope, and therefore it becomes pertinent to ask, who is to blame, the medium or the messenger? I cannot give an answer to that, but look at the medium of our times. The Western media and big tech have blocked all Russian channels like Russia Today and Sputnik and information about the war from the Russian perspective. We only receive newscasts from Western media and pliable Indian channels who parrot the Western line. So what I'm saying is this: Putin might really be a monster, but let me watch the other side also to make my own judgment. What happened to freedom of thought and speech if I cannot access all sides and arrive at my own conclusions? We live in strange times when both the medium and the messenger are distorted. I will end this episode by telling you how this distortion works in real life. As a kid, I used to read commando comics in school, where each comic depicted the valor of Allied troops versus the nefarious Germans in the Second World War. I grew up thinking of the valor of white Allied troops. Imagine my surprise and shock when much later I came to know that millions of Indian soldiers had taken part in the Great War and fought bravely and laid down their lives in battlefields all across Europe. As a matter of fact, the Indian troops were the backbone of the Great War, and it could not have been won by the Allies without their contribution. And yet, despite all that, there is hardly a mention of their contribution in films or literature or on stage. It's like their stellar contribution has been erased from the pages of history. This is what distorted communication does. This media distortion is again at work today, and we have to read between the lines to discover the pure, unalloyed truth hidden in the pile of lies and deception. So, on this note, I come to the end of this episode of the CAA Show. I hope you have enjoyed this particular episode, and if you do like our show, do subscribe to us. And on this note, it's goodbye and cheers from my end.